Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Week 17 edition of the Football Diehards show. We are almost done with the regular season, Eric. This is the second to last week of the regular season. I hope that your 2022 is going well. This is also the second to last day of the year, so the next time we see you will be in 2023, wrapping up the regular season and hopefully going into the playoffs for you. But this is a week where a lot of playoff contention things are going to come into play with how much, and there's one game in particular that I want to discuss with you for certain on that to get your take, because it's going to be a polarizing one, and that's the Jacksonville game. But we'll get to that when we get to it. But first of all, how you doing? We didn't get to do the show together last night. It was you, or last week. It was you and Drew. I didn't escape the flu that ran through our house, so I was down with that for the Saturday show. I didn't even get to catch you guys because I was just kind of sleeping. But how did it go? How did the show go last Saturday for you guys? And how was your DFS success that week?
Yeah, the show was a ton of fun, right? It's always nice to have Drew filling in. He does a fantastic job. My DFS week was a little bit lackluster overall. Ended up a little bit upside down. Just didn't quite get onto the right combination of players, right? A lot of the guys that we talked about did in fact end up doing pretty well, but didn't have them with a nice correlated run back, or didn't have enough of the other guys that went off. So a lot of near misses, and in the tournament game, that means that you're usually having a bad week.
Right. And as you were saying that, I'm racking my brains trying to remember if I even won this past week. But this past week was a whirlwind. We lost power for 6 days, on top of being sick in that storm that hit the Northeast. So it wasn't a very festive Christmas, and we made the best of it. But we got to have it Christmas morning in the house with my kids, even in the dark with candles and stuff. But then we were kind of supplanted in a hotel, and I did build some lineups there, but it wasn't quite the same.
Yeah, for sure.
But we move on. We got 13 games on this main slate, and we are live streaming on YouTube right now. If you want to join us, this is championship week for a lot of people in seasonal long leagues. So if you have questions on that, we'd be happy to answer them. There's already one in there, which we'll get to shortly. So thank you for joining us. You can follow me on Twitter at JAC3600. Eric is at Fantasy Nav. Eric, before we get started too, how did the Pros with Joe's finish up? Eric runs that Pros with Joe's, which is an amazing charity competition. I was a part of it this year, and my partner and I got creamed, but it's always a fun time. How did that wind up finishing? Is it finished, or is this the last week of it?
This is our championship week. It is still going, so we're down to our final two. It is Gab Gowdy from FanDuel. She's playing for the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center, facing off against professional fish hider Jordan Loop, who's playing for St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. So those are our final two head-to-head in Week 17. We are also still raising money that will go to whichever of those charities is associated with the winning team. It's proswithjoes.com/donate. Fundraising is always a little bit slow in season. We do a lot of our fundraising preseason. That's where we get a lot of traction. But as we're winding down the season, if you are in the giving mood, if you have some DFS or some season-long winnings coming your way, if you feel so inclined, head over to proswithjoes.com/donate. Give a little, give a lot, whatever you can spare.
Love it. I will be absolutely doing that myself as the year winds up as well. It's a great cause. A lot of great charities in that. Those are two good people too. I follow and interact with both of those, with both Gab and Jordan. Yeah. Very, very good people. There won't be a loser in that one, no matter who winds up the champion. So good job with that, Eric. All right, so let's get down to it. We're going to do things a little bit differently this week. Usually we kind of go game by game, but as our regulars have seen, sometimes that gets a little tight at the end, and we don't always get to fully discuss some of the games that we really want to. And we wind up throwing some important plays in right at the end that really should have gotten some more airtime. So we're going to do it a little differently this week since there's 13 games on the main slate. We're going to go position by position. I'm sure there will be some game stack discussion in there. from the GPP perspective. Like I said, I really want to kind of tackle the Jacksonville team as a whole with you and see how you're approaching that, because that's a really difficult one given the playoff scenario right now. But before we get down to it, I do want to we have a question from Bill Reitmeyer. He says, I'm trying to win my Super Bowl. Can I trust Aaron Jones' ankle and Dillon, or should I pick up Algier? And then he says, I have Hopkins, DJ Moore, and Garrett Wilson. I'm leaning Wilson. What are your thoughts? So for the second one to me is easy, especially with Arizona is down to David Blau as their quarterback. With Mike White back in as the Jets quarterback, I'm definitely going with Wilson there for that. What about you?
I am as well. Yeah, the decision would be between Wilson and DJ Moore for me. Hopkins is a pretty easy scratch with David Blau under center.
Yeah.
You're really far more reliant on touchdowns with DJ Moore, and the same can be said to a lesser degree for Wilson, but it is a far higher volume passing offense for the Jets with Mike White under center.
Yeah, agree. I think that's an easy one for us there. What about the other one? Do you like Algier better than those Green Bay backs, or would you roll one of the other? This is assuming both of them play. I think if Jones is out, which it's easily Dillon, but if both of those play, what do you think?
Yeah, if they both play, I'm comfortable firing up Aaron Jones, right? I don't think that they're going to put him out there if he's not well enough to contribute in a positive way for this team, right? They still have their eyes on the postseason as we get to the end of the regular season here. So if he's not well enough to have an impact on the game, I don't think he'll be out there. So if he's starting, I'm comfortable firing him up over Dillon and Algier. Obviously, if he's out, it's AJ Dillon to the moon, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think you need to pick up Algier. I mean, if you have someone to drop just as just to hold him there, or even to block your opponent from getting him, I'm okay with, because he's a good play this week too. Yeah. But I'm with you there. If they're both in, I'd go Jones, and if Jones is out, I'd go Dillon there over Algier for either one. All right, so thank you for that question. Keep them coming. These can be DFS related or season long related, especially championship week, and we will get to them as we get to them. But we're going to get going with the DFS slate right now. As I said, 13 games to tackle here, so we're going to start with the quarterback position. I figure the way that we can kind of break this down, we'll dip into each other's specialty here, but me being predominantly cash play, Eric being a little bit more GPP centric, we can offer you different takes on them and kind of spitball off each other on that. So let's get the quarterback situation going first of all. So at the top of the pricing pool, this is an interesting week for quarterback, because there's a ton of cheap options, but the expensive ones aren't really popping as far as rostership goes. So where are you looking in that top tier of quarterbacks? I mean, we have Justin Fields against Detroit, kind of stands out to me. He's the one I wrote up on Football Diehards. But you have Mahomes, you have Herbert. We don't have Josh Allen. He's playing Monday night. Is there anyone in there that is in your GPP pool?
Yeah, I mean that top tier is relatively thin, right? Usually we have several quarterbacks, 8K and above. In this week, we've got Patrick Mahomes at 8.5. We've got Justin Fields at 7.9. Next man up is Justin Herbert at 7.1. So pretty reasonably priced quarterbacking market in the Week 17 slate. Patrick Mahomes has a tough spot against Denver. Obviously, we saw Denver kind of roll over against the Baker Mayfield-led Rams last week. So I have confidence in Patrick Mahomes being able to do something similar this week. With Justin Fields, we've talked about this for a few weeks. Really, the main issue with him is confidence or lack thereof in his stacking partners. I love him. He's a really good shot to lead the slate in scoring yet again. He's projected to be one of the more popular quarterbacks, and rightfully so. But there's not a super clear line as to who you should stack him up with. Maybe Claypool gets back out there, Met to an extent. Anytime that there's not a very clear set of stacking options with a quarterback, that always has me kind of leaning away from them in a tournament context. Herbert can be interesting. 7.1K. The price is certainly right. This Rams defense is not who they were even 6 weeks ago. Certainly not heading into the season. So I think they can be, they can be exploited, kind of like Herbert at 7.1, and then from there you're really getting into, that kind of big, bulky middle class of quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I think you hit on the biggest struggle there with Fields too. If you're looking at him on his own against Detroit, the last time these two teams played, he threw for 167 yards and two touchdowns, but he also ran for another 147 yards on the ground and two rushing touchdowns. So I mean, this is the game, right? That's the it's the highest total on the field. It's indoors in week 17, which goes a long way. So, I mean, I think that I like the idea of stacking this game both ways. But you hit it there, right? That who do you stack Fields with? I guess, Komet is probably the answer, right? Because against the Lions in week 10, he went 4 for 74 and two touchdowns, and that was with competition, with Darnell Mooney there. I'm not sure if Claypool was on the team by week 10. I guess he probably was, right? The trade deadline was before that.
I believe he was, yeah.
So, I mean, that was probably a full complement. So I'm okay. I'm okay doing that in a GPP sense. I'm not really sure if you can trust any other running backs there. Um, on the cheaper side of the quarterback, how about so here, I'll build off of this first of all, since we're kind of on this game. My cash pool pretty much is one quarterback this week, and which is scary a little bit to me who that guy is, because
Say it.
I mean,
Say it.
it's Goff.
Golf, yeah.
I'll listen on other other players here, but there's a reason that there's really no reason for me to go to any of the other one. I mean, I like Daniel Jones, but he's $100 more, and I don't like him near as much as Goff. Aaron Rodgers has got a great matchup, but he's $400 more. He's not throwing as much. It's not an indoor game. So, I mean, to me at 5,600, Goff is the guy for me at quarterback. I can't ever call a quarterback a lock in cash, because you can build different ways. I mean, especially if you're putting wide receivers in and you want to match them with your quarterback. But I mean, I'm going with Goff in course for sure. And if you look at the numbers at home this year, he's got 20 touched. He's averaging 277 passing yards per game at home. He's got 20 touchdown passes and only 3 picks. He really has settled in. The Lions themselves are averaging over 32 points per game at home. And the Bears are a soft defense. They've allowed the 8th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. So basically for me, I mean, I don't want to dip into the other positions because we're going to go position by position here, but I'm kind of starting my cash lineups with a Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown stack, and then building out from there. So that said, where are you on the GPP stream with him? Because I'm not the only one that's on him. He is looking like he's projecting as the highest rostered quarterback, for pretty much the reasons I just said. Where are you on him in GPPs for that matter?
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly the player I would start cash builds with as well. I mean, 5.6K is just absurd relative to the streak of games that he's been on and his performance at home. The thing that I like about Goff this week is you mentioned the clear decision in terms of who to stack him with Amon-Ra St. Brown, but there are a plethora of options that you can use excuse me, as a double stack, right? You can tap into DJ Chark if you really want to get spicy and try to capture lightning in a bottle again with the tight end like last week. That's a player to stack with him. Swift is potentially in that range. Jameson Williams potentially in that range, right? So, while he's a very safe cash play, there are so many options that have some ceiling and that are viable as kind of that tertiary, third stacking piece to go along with him, that you can really get different, even though you're playing what projects to be, the, if not one of the more popular quarterbacks on the board.
Yeah, I like that too, and I'm probably going to spend way too much money on that in GPPs, because I'm going to want to get like every angle for that one, especially with the way this game has been set up. Yeah. But by the way, before we get going, we're joined in chat by Wendy Early, who is one of my new favorite people on
Hey,
Twitter here, and
Wendy.
she says, if you're not looking at the page, Eric, thanks, Eric, for answering my SOS, and you were right. LOL, Haskins, boo, I listened to you. So I wasn't present for that interaction, but it looks like you talked her off some kind of a ledge Thursday night, so that's good.
I did,
And
and
Wendy
Wendy
did.
is the co-manager with Jordan, so she's still one
Oh,
of the two
awesome.
teams alive in Pros with Joes.
Awesome. Well, Wendy, good luck with that this week. We're rooting for you. We love the Pros with Joes. So thank you for all you did to help out with your donations and teaming up with Jordan. That had to be an adventure in and of itself. But thank you again. And I will bring up one thing because Wendy did ask a question in the chat. Just in case, so we don't take it for granted. When we talk about cash games, we're talking double ups, head to heads, 50-50. Pretty much the type of contest where you just have to beat 50% of the field to win back your money, or it's close enough thereof, whatever, after they take the insane rake out of it. And then GPPs are the larger field tournaments. They can be single entry or the multi-entry GPPs, but that's what we mean when we say cash games versus GPPs. All right, so thank you for that. Other quarterbacks that you're looking at here. So, let's say a freak injury or lightning storm prevents Goff from being the cash quarterback. Who's the pivot here? I mentioned Daniel Jones and Aaron Rodgers. Those are kind of the ones that I'm looking at first. Anyone else in the quarterback pool that you think would kind of fit into that cash category? And maybe who are some of your favorite quarterbacks to stack with receivers?
Yeah, there's not really much that we haven't talked about that I would feel confident enough to put the cash stamp on them. Right? There are other guys that are kind of fringy and in the pool. I mean, almost regardless of matchup, we have to talk about Trevor Lawrence in this game against Houston. Right? Houston's playing a little bit better. Sounds like there's kind of a split crowd as to whether or not people think this will be kind of a regular game, or if they'll kind of take their foot off the gas. Mike White down at 5.4K is a little bit interesting. He's certainly this Jets offense is at its best when he is under center. He's been able to put up enough ceiling to certainly pay off that price tag, but also be in the mix for tournaments with a bit of upside there. I mean, if you really want to get cute, I wouldn't feel good about it. Tom Brady's someone to be considered. This is an absolute must-win game, obviously. But
Mm-hmm.
if you look at some of Tom Brady's underlying numbers, a lot of the things that we loved about him last year and in recent years, his passing volume, his propensity to throw in the red zone and to the end zone, his deep passes, a lot of that have really maintained. He's number one in pass attempts. He's number three in red zone passing attempts. He's number one in pass attempts per game or pace of play. It's number two in deep pass attempts. I mean, all the things that we like, these high leverage opportunities. He's tossing them all over the field. The matchup against Carolina is decent enough to where if they really start to get humming, he could certainly turn in top five, top seven performance. No one's going to be on him. I mean, 6.1K with the kind of laughing stock that the Buccaneers season has been. So he might be someone that I'll maybe get a little cute and click his name one or two times as my last couple of entries, but that's really about the extent of the player pool for me at quarterback.
Yeah, I like it too. And the other thing is they're fully healthy too. They got Mike Evans, they've got Chris Godwin in. Looks like Julio Jones should play too, so they've got him engaged. Cade Otton kind of emerged as the primary tight end last week, and two running backs that are capable of catching the passes. So yeah, I like that a lot. J.C. Horn being out really improves the Bucs wide receivers matchup if you're
Yes.
stacking Brady with players too. So I think that's a really good call there. And like you said, not few are going to be on it. I'm curious of your thoughts on. I've mentioned Aaron Rodgers a couple of times. I'm curious on your thoughts there too. I feel as though people are going to be a little bit too into him for this. I'm really trying to see which side of this I'm on because the matchup is great. I mean, the Packers have a nice team total of 26. They've won 3 in a row. They're in the playoff hunt. Minnesota has given up the 5th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. So there's really nothing in the matchup that suggests Rodgers can't go off. Problem here is that he doesn't have a 300-yard passing game this season, and even during their recent win streak, he's only has 3 touchdown passes. They've been playing ball control with those 2 running backs, ball control and defense. It's not been Rodgers just slinging it all over. So I'm kind of more into Brady based on what you said than Rodgers in this spot. But talk to me about this game. Is it something that you think you can go to?
Yeah, I mean, a case can be made for it. I don't feel really good about it, right? You know, even in like you mentioned, you know, during this kind of hot streak, he's got 3 touchdowns essentially. He's still only attempting like mid-30s passes, so it's not like he's, you know, throwing the ball all over the yard. He's kind of like the North version of Dak Prescott. This is very much so a run first offense. You know, they want to get things done with their defense as well. The only thing that can kind of throw that game script to the side is Minnesota has not only individual matchups they can take advantage of, but just so many different ways to just gash you offensively that it could very easily become a point where they need to be throwing more in order to stay competitive and potentially try to win this game. You know, that's the circumstance by which I think we see Rodgers, you know, kind of creep up into tournament or just broader DFS consideration. A lot of things have to line up well for that to happen. And even when they get there, I still would expect a fair amount of Aaron Jones and or AJ Dillon when they get into scoring position, when they're on 3rd down, right? So, you know, you have to line up a lot of dominoes to tell yourself a story where he's going to be in the mix for you. And that typically introduces more risk than I'm trying to take on.
Yeah. Yeah. I would tend to agree with that too. It'll be interesting for me to see where the rostership falls with him. I mean, if it looks like he's kind of creeping a little bit too high up, you know, we've got Goff kind of outstripping the field for rostership here, but he's in that next tier, and I probably won't go there. I'd be a little bit more inclined to stick to the Brady and Lawrence plays in that price range that you mentioned. So I mean, I think we've kind of covered the quarterback pool there. Cash is an easy path this week. Some different ways you can take with GPPs, but let's move on to the running back position. And again, if you have any questions, DFS or season long related, post them in the chat. We'll get to them. The running back spot. There's a lot here to unpack, and we can kind of go a bunch of different ways in the expensive tier, the mid tier, and the cheap to get some viable options here. Some we've already kind of mentioned as part of the questions that goes. Well, let's start right at the top with Christian McCaffrey, who is 9,000. I mean, that guy has showed exactly why the 49ers went out and traded for him. He's breaking box scores again. Last 4 games, he's averaged 23 touches, 124 yards per game, and has 6 touchdowns. Raiders are a soft matchup for running backs with the 9th most fantasy points allowed there. I guess the only issue here is if the 49ers are still going all out. They do have somewhat of an outside chance for that 1 seed. They can get to the 2 seed, which gives them 2 home games for sure. I'm thinking there's not much risk that the plug is going to be pulled on McCaffrey. But where are you sitting on him?
Yeah, to your latter point, I'm right there with you. I don't think that we're going to see them, you know, take their foot off the gas. You know, sitting in the 3rd seed. I mean, there's tangible value to getting up to the 2 seed, right? There's the home games. Also, that side of the bracket might line up to be a little bit more favorable. So I don't think we see the 49ers mail it in. And with that being the case, I mean, Christian McCaffrey is certainly the most likely running back to pay off a 9K price tag week in and week out. He has pretty much every single week in his tenure as a 49er, and I don't see why that would stop now against an absolutely woeful run defense in the Raiders and a team that seems to be in complete turmoil. I mean, everything's setting up for another business as usual type of week for Christian McCaffrey, and that means piles and piles of fantasy points.
I agree, and I guess again, if we're searching for risks to take on, it's if they get a big lead, maybe they pull the plug on him, which I guess could be viable. But I mean, I think if they get a big lead, it's at the hands of him. So he's paying off that price tag now. And honestly, if you think back to when it was peak McCaffrey with Carolina, his price tag was almost at 11,000. 9,000 is still a bargain for him. So I have no issue at all paying for him in any format. The other one that I'm looking at the top, which I really like, is, and I'm praying it's not the homer in me doing this, which is Saquon Barkley. I'm going to be a mess this weekend as the Giants try to clinch their first playoff spot since 2016. I said to my 6-year-old the other day that you've never seen the Giants in the playoffs. He had no idea what I was talking about, but I sounded impressive when I said it. So Saquon at $1,000 cheaper, I think is a really solid play in cash. He's averaging 21 touches per game since their bye. He had some really inefficient play in that stretch for a while, but even still, he's averaging 90 yards per game. The Colts are kind of a run funnel defense, as they're still, despite all their other struggles, they're still locking down the passing game pretty well. So the other thing is that Barkley has 18 targets in the passing game over the last 2 weeks. So I think his floor is astronomical for cash, and I think he's got the ceiling in GPP. What do you think about Barkley?
Yeah, I think that's really the book on him this week, right? Both Barkley and McCaffrey are projected to be some of the more popular running backs, if not right up there in the top 2 or 3. So you're not really going to get a whole lot of leverage going from one to the other. But the salary savings is considerable, right? $1,000 is real money in this DFS game that we play. So that would really be the case for Barkley over McCaffrey. Specifically, the thing that gives me the most excitement is that note that you snuck in there towards the end: 8 and 10 targets in his last 2 games. Obviously, those were more ceiling performances, in part because he found his way into the end zone, but his opportunity to find his way into the end zone is largely tied to that passing volume, right? So, I mean, if he's going to be north of 5 or 6 targets even, he's just got so many ways to get there that he's perfectly viable in cash. And obviously coming off of 23 and 27.3 fantasy points respectively, more with the bonuses now that I say it out loud. I mean, he's clearly got the ceiling as well, right? So interesting way to save salary, but you're not really getting a whole lot of leverage relative to the field.
Right. It's looking like they're going to be the top 2, unless we see some shifting. I mean, we might now with some of the news that's come in, and we'll get to that in a second. What about some other running backs, maybe above that 7K range that you're looking at? So, we've got McCaffrey 9,000, Eckler 8,500, Barkley 8,000, Jacobs 7,400, Chubb 73, Connor 72, Aaron Jones 71. We kind of talked about him already, and then Dalvin Cook at 7,000. Anyone else stand out to you in that range?
Nope, nobody that really jumps off the page, right? Austin Eckler, it sounds like there's some question about his availability. I'm imagining that he's going to play. He's in a fine spot, on the season. If you're looking at, every week of the year so far, the Rams look like a relatively tough run defense. If you, shorten that sample to the Rams team that's going to be on the field this weekend, not nearly as difficult. So Austin Eckler is fine. I mentioned my concerns overall about the state of the Raiders. Probably not going to have Josh Jacobs in my player pool, not only with that kind of off the field and distraction stuff, but also San Francisco is maybe the best defensive front in all of the league. So, for a guy that is based on volume and, needs to get past that line and get some chunk plays, his chances of that are relatively low. Similar thought with Nick Chubb. It's basically touchdown or bust for Nick Chubb. I don't think he's found the end zone since week 11 or week 12. I don't think he has a very good opportunity to do so this week against the Commanders. They're relatively tough against the run. Do you like James Conner a good bit? 7.2K. I mean, how he's been playing over this recent stretch of games is incredible, right? He's taking on all of the workload. He is getting it done against stacked fronts seemingly every single week. He'll see more stacked fronts this week, as we talked about with David Blau earlier in the show, but that hasn't necessarily slowed him down yet. So he's someone that I'll have in the player pool. Dalvin Cook, fantastic matchup against Green Bay. I think we see a fair amount of him, and Aaron Jones if he plays. We talked about it in sort of the case against Rodgers. This team loves to run the ball, especially in high leverage situations. So a lot of these top tier players are kind of struck through for me. But as we get down towards that 7K, low 7K range, some interest in those guys for sure.
Connor was the one that I wanted to highlight here in that list that you talked about, because you mentioned his usage. I mean, just to put a number on what that usage is, over the last 4 games, Connor has not played 14 snaps. That's in 4 games combined that he hasn't played in. So, I mean, usually that kind of usage is something, especially for this price tag, which at 7,200 is pretty friendly. That kind of usage is one that you really give a long look to. Here's my possible concern with that. They have nothing to play for. It's a short week for them, and they're traveling east for an early game. Like you said, stacked box looks to be the way for Arizona there. He's, with the quarterback that they're trotting out there. And he's also questionable after missing practice this week with an illness. So I don't know. I'm not totally comfortable with him as I'd like to be for that kind of usage, just because, they have their pick, unlike some of these other teams that have traded it away and kind of screwed themselves in this upcoming draft. Arizona is not one of those teams. They do have their early pick, so they do not really have incentive to win here. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid argument. For me, especially as we get down to the end of any season where, teams are out of contention or where, playoff positioning is already solidified, I do think that we, as an industry, kind of overlook, the sort of individual or personal pride of players, trying to make a statement, trying to hit contract incentives, thinking about their next contract down the road. I think that's a lot of what James Conner's motivation of late is, right? He's really trying to put good film out there as he gets a little bit
free agent?
Longer in the tooth. Technically, he's through 2025, but there's some softness in that, right? But heading into his age 28 season next year, he's probably got one more contract in front of him, a sizable contract if he plays his cards right. So that's a consideration. Cliff Kingsbury is very likely coaching for his job. So, I don't see him necessarily rolling over unless that decision has already been made in private, right? So, it could happen, but I think we see, largely a typical game out of the Cardinals this week and out of most of the teams that are, already out of the hunt.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll use him. I don't think he'll be in my cash lineup. That price, I'll get up to the other two that we talked about before.
The crazy thing with Connor, over the last 3 weeks, he's gotten 20 targets, like almost 7 targets a game, right? Like he's always been that kind of workhorse between the tackles guy. If he's pushing up into the high single digits of targets, I mean, that floor is phenomenal.
Yeah, that's true too. This is the tough part of this year to get stuff like that too. But let's move into the mid tier here. So I have some players in this kind of 5,500 to 7,000 range that I'm into. But I want to talk about the one, and let's let's cover this game as a whole right now, because you mentioned Trevor Lawrence early on. He's questionable with a toe injury. Travis Etienne is $6,400 facing off against the matchup that you want to have your running backs have against Houston, who is pretty much last in every relevant stat against running backs, by far the most fantasy points per game allowed. 6,400 seems like a bargain. This is a guy that had 25 touches last week, 22 the week before, in both of their wins. So I've been back and forth with this, not only in my own head but on Twitter with people as well. Who are basically saying he's an obvious play in your season long lineups. Doug Peterson has pretty much vehemently said that he's playing his starters and he's playing to win. If you look at the New York Times playoff simulator, I'm kind of laying this all out for you because I need to know where you are for my own sake, as many as anyone else listening here. The New York Times playoff simulator has Jacksonville with a 2% chance of getting a wild card, which means they need tons and tons and tons of help to get into that wild card position. Basically, what that means is their Week 18 game against Tennessee is everything. That the winner of that team is in the playoffs. Tennessee, we saw last night, rest their main guys for this reason. So I am really, really afraid of all Jacksonville players here. What's your take?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily in the same space as you in terms of fear or concern that these players don't get a typical workload. In part because even with that simulator, there's still a door ever so slightly creaked open that if they don't win the division, they might be able to sneak their way into a wild card spot. NFL coaches typically don't like closing those doors, but also historically, Doug Peterson feels like he plays it pretty straight up with the media, right? He's not out there, making people read the tea leaves or, misleading, media members with his quotes. So if he's going out there and saying that his guys are going to play like it's a normal week, I'm inclined to take that at face value. If we want to go down narrative street, I was talking about this earlier today. I also think Doug Peterson he kind of coaches on vibes, right? Like he likes momentum. He likes the trajectory of where his team's going. I don't think he wants to do anything that potentially derails that. Your point about the Titans is fair. The injury picture for the Titans is entirely different from what the Jaguars are facing right now, right? Their entire O-line is down. Malik Willis or Josh Dobbs, I'm not sure if that was an injury consideration or them trying to rest one or the other, see what they have in preparation for this Week 18 game. But the overarching point is I think that these are two teams that are in kind of vastly different circumstances as they stand heading into Week 17 and how they approach these games.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I would say, if you're in the championship in your seasonal league, you're not benching ETN.
Yeah.
Just with this matchup, DFS, it's a tougher story here because being a predominant cash player, I want safety for my players. I want that floor, and if he's not playing more than a half of football, that takes away from that. He's got to hit in that first half to really pay that price tag off. So it's friendly price tag, 6,400 for sure. But what's your DFS line on him? Are you if so? Since you seem to be comfortable with this, you're good throwing him in the DFS lineups? Is he more a GPP play for you than a cash play because of this, or what do you think?
Yeah, with the information I have at hand, he looks like he's a pretty solid tournament play, right? I see him sub 5% right now for a guy that's going to be in kind of the low to the mid 20s of touches in a fantastic matchup, right? The Texans defense has been playing better of late, but not against the run. They went from last to third to last. They're still allowing 5.1 yards per carry. They're still giving up rushing touchdowns left and right. So he's in a fantastic spot. If he's going to be, in this single digit range in terms of rostership, I'd be very interested in him. I wouldn't be surprised if we get to Sunday morning, we see him floating in that kind of 8 to 10 range, which is probably where he should be. At that point, he'll be in the pool, but not really a priority for me.
I'm hoping that he stays where he is, where you describe now. If he's that low, I don't have to make that cash decision because I can just play the
Yeah.
ownership game. Say he's low enough, I don't need to take the risk. Somebody else can and can go overweight on him in GPP because then it's just all upside from there. But I suspect you're going to be right, especially if Peterson keeps talking the way he is. Um, but that's a tough one. That's a tough one for me. So we'll kind of follow that as it goes. Other running backs in this kind of 5,500 to 6,000, 7,000 range. I really like Ramondre Stevenson, although I like him a lot less now with Damian Harris not on the injury report. 6,800, he should get a nice workload for that in a must-win game for the Patriots. And Miles Sanders at 5,900 feels like a big time bargain to me in this one, just given the touch count that he's been getting, and his red zone usage, and the fact that Jalen Hurts is doubtful to play, which isn't going to steal away those red zone carries from him. He had 22 touches last week against Dallas. He didn't do much with them, but for me, the touch count there at 5,900 is big. He's going to be a strong consideration for me in cash. Who else? Who else in this kind of range are you looking at? 5,500 or so to 7,000.
Yeah, there's a couple of interesting plays there. Trying to find ways to get into this Detroit Chicago game. David Montgomery is going to be in the player pool. Detroit's defense prior to last week was a little bit tougher against the run. Obviously, we saw Carolina go absolutely berserk against them on the ground. So we'll see what we get. But ultimately, way to get into this game is a priority. David Montgomery, even with Khalil Herbert out there last week and in earlier points of the season, was basically a lock for 15 to 18 touches every single week. So he'll be in the mix there. Cam Akers, as much as I hate to say it, right? A Rams running back rising out of obscurity to win fantasy championships, a tradition unlike any other. Like here we are. He's getting the usage. He's getting the high leverage touches. 6.1K. I'm expecting he's going to be a bit more popular than what I'm seeing. I'm seeing him around 5%. I think he's going to probably push closer to 10 or so. He's probably the counterbalance to Travis Etienne, right? Whichever direction Etienne's rostership goes is going to be the opposite for Akers and the other way around. Jerick McKinnon is someone that needs to be considered. To a lesser extent, Isaiah Pacheco. This Denver matchup against running backs is absolutely slam dunk over the last 3 or 4 weeks. McKinnon is the one that's going berserk here over the last few games, but he is still very much so their receiving back to his benefit. He's got maybe the best coach at utilizing that type of player in recent history in Andy Reid. But both of these players should have plenty of opportunities in a very, very favorable spot. So that's really about the extent of this kind of mid-tier for players that I'll look to either roster or at least have in the pool.
I like it. That's a solid mid-tier pool that you can get a lot of different ways to the field, and by keeping some of the chalkier plays in there. So I like that as well. As far as the cheap end goes, and Rodney, we see your question in there. We'll get to it in just a minute. Right now, I mean, as far as the cheap plays go for cash, Brian Robinson, I assume, is going to see his rostership shoot up there tremendously. Antonio Gibson has been ruled out. It's a home matchup and a must-win for Washington against Cleveland, who has been a one we've targeted all season long for running backs. Third most fantasy points per game to running backs. Robinson is not involved in the passing game, but I think at that price, it doesn't matter. He's going to be someone that's very popular in cash and one that I'm wholly comfortable rostering at 5,200. What do you think about Robinson?
Yeah, we talk a lot on this show about waiting for these projections to update. I see Brian Robinson at 8.2% rostership right now. That is going to at least double by the time we get to lineup lock on Sunday. 5.2K. I mean, he's been playing a pretty good brand of ball, even with Antonio Gibson out there. Now, Gibson is injured and out of the way. all the volume you could want, smash matchup. I mean, he's about as close as a lock as you can get. If his rostership is pushing into, the 20s, maybe you can make an argument for fading him. I'm probably not going to subscribe to that argument. Everything is lining up for Robinson in this week. Beyond him, Zach Moss is kind of interesting. He's getting all the volume, right? We talked about him getting 2-1 or out touching Jackson 2-1 in that Minnesota game. The scale slid further in his favor in that game against the Chargers on Monday night. Your Giants on the season are about middle of the road against the run in terms of fantasy points allowed, but they're giving up 5.3 yards per carry to running backs. So if you're looking at a guy that's going to get a whole heap of touches, might be able to do something with that. Kind of interesting. Talked a little bit earlier about potentially stacking DeAndre Swift with Jared Goff. That's certainly in play. Maybe even there's some standalone value as a run back for DeAndre Swift at 5.3K. This Detroit backfield has been a nightmare this season.
Yeah.
Now that we've introduced Jackson into that mix, they're officially three-headed, but it feels like Williams' workload is the one that's being eaten away by Jackson more than DeAndre Swift. His role is relatively well established, so don't mind him. The other name that really jumps out for me is Tyler Algier. Getting more and more work over the recent weeks here. Getting it done. He's up over 100 all-purpose yards in his last 2 games. So he's got a really good path to paying off 5.3K as well.
Oh, I think he's a great play against the Cardinals here. He's essentially taken over as the lead back on that team, and even got 5 targets last week as well with Ritter, and that's a nice safe thing for a rookie QB to be able to lean on a pass catching back like that. 42 snaps to Patterson's 26 last week, 22 touches to Patterson's 9. And then the yards, he had 117 yards, and Patterson had barely, 31. So the Cardinals are soft matchup against the run. I think that's a solid play too. And he would have been the guy that I would have been using in cash if Robinson hadn't popped up. And maybe both, we'll see how the lineups shake out. But I am going to kind of want to try and live at least in that upper echelon of running backs for cash for the floor there. All right, so that's about the running back position. We'll get to the wide receivers in just a second. We got about 25 minutes left of this show to get the wide receiver and tight end position. But we got a question from Rodney Rios in the chat. Trying to win PPR and have to replace Derrick Henry. Running with Connor and Akers at running back, have Diggs and Waddle at wide receiver. Very nice. No question why you're in the championship. Flex options are Judy, Ayuk, Hollywood Brown, Jeff Wilson, Zach Moss, and Algier. So then it's PPR. There's a lot of options there. For me, it's between Judy and Algier. I don't know about you. I would tend to lean the touch count. Judy is a nice option, likely playing from behind to Kansas City there, but I would go with the aforementioned Algier and his touch count and his efficiency lately. What about you?
Yeah, those are definitely the 2 names that I'm deciding between. Ayuk is in a fine spot. It sounds like Debo was rolled out earlier today. Yeah. But honestly, San Francisco, their model is to establish a lead and just salt it away on the ground and with their defense. So if he's not part of that lead in the very early part of the game, it's probably going to be a down week for him. For these close flex decisions, I usually lean on the side of the running back based in large part due to the volume that you mentioned with Algier. I would go that way as well. Jerry Jeudy's on the upswing, but you're depending on Russell Wilson. And if you've done that at any point this season, it hasn't been a very fun time for you. So I'll go the safer route with Tyler Algier.
Yeah, so I think we're in agreement there, but definitely there's upside to be had in Judy, but you're right. I mean, Denver's offense has just been so bad this year. It's tough to trust him in a championship. All right, thank you for that question. We are going to head to the wide receiver position now, and we'll try and get to everybody here. We spent a lot of time on the running back there. So, I mean, I'll start as far as cash goes, just to put a little bow on the Jared Goff talk that we said earlier, the one guy that I'm absolutely rostering in cash here is Amon-Ra St. Brown, 52-point game total in that game. He's averaged 10 targets per game over the last 7. And that's, by the way, or I should say, excuse me, over the last, since Jamison Williams has been in there. That's the kind of the thing I've been monitoring with him. Because, it bore mentioning to see if Williams was going to eke into his targets at all. I didn't think he would, but it was definitely something to watch. He hasn't. So Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown is definitely the starting point for me in cash. Who else do you like in this upper range? So if we're looking at like that 7,500 and above, besides St. Brown at 7,800, we got Jefferson all the way at 9,500, Tyreek at 89, Devontae Adams 85, AJ Brown at 79, DeAndre Hopkins at 77, and Jalen Waddle at 7,500. Who stands out to you in that range?
Yeah. So I'll start with some strike throughs, mainly DeAndre Hopkins. We've talked enough about David Blau for a lifetime. That the perimeter Atlanta defense is also somewhat difficult. Devontae Adams, I want to qualify in a season-long context. You're still starting Devontae Adams. He has a relatively tough matchup, and this team is 100% in turmoil. The thing that's particularly worrisome about him, Charvarius Ward shadowed last week, and he hasn't really been shadowing very much this season. So if he's going to shadow again, it's very likely going to be Devontae Adams. So, at 8.5K, there's just, enough working against him. Amon-Ra St. Brown is certainly the smash play out of this window. Justin Jefferson, matchup proof, salary proof almost, right? We're going to be paying 10K for him happily as soon as next season. The names that are kind of interesting, AJ Brown, obviously did well enough with Gardner Minshew under center last week. The one that really jumps out for me is Tyreek Hill, 8.9K. It's going to be Teddy Bridgewater this week. I'm seeing Tyreek Hill right around 2% rostership. The two games that Teddy Bridgewater, the 2 games that Teddy Bridgewater started / played the majority of snaps, Hill had 10 and 12 receptions. He finished as wide receiver 4 and 3, respectively, 25 or really 26 and 30 points. So, an absolute game breaker that's going to be in the low single digits is always going to be of interest to me. So he's probably my favorite play. There's obviously risk with that, but the upside is tremendous.
He's he's probably my favorite GPP play of the week at any position. Just for some stuff that you were talking about there, I'll throw in on top of that Jalen Mills, Marcus Jones, and Jack Jones all look like they're going to miss this game. And Adrian Phillips is not playing at full strength either. And Tyreek Hill has averaged 17.2 yards per catch on throws from Bridgewater. I mean, there is no reason that he should be that low rostered. And the only plausible explanation is just false narrative that Tua is not the quarterback, which doesn't matter with Tyreek Hill. So I love that call, and I will be overweight on him in GPPs for sure, whether I'm stacking the game or not, which I'm probably not. I mean, this isn't really the game to look at, but I like him. I love him as a one-off. What about this mid range? So maybe from 6,000 to about 7,500. For cash, there's not much to me that's standing out outside of if you buy into the fact that Jacksonville plays their starters throughout. Christian Kirk at 6,000 seems to be a nice value. Probably not going to go there. So nobody really in this range is interesting me in cash. You mentioned Ayuk at 6,300. Well, you mentioned him for season long, but I mean, he's 6,300. Maybe a GPP play there. Anyone else in this 6K to 7.5 range you like?
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the rules of Vegas, you don't leave the table when you're on a heater. So Devontae Smith is on an absolute whirlwind of a heater right now. He should be in the player pool. It'll boil down to rostership for him, but I see him in the mid single digits. He'll be in range there. Keenan Allen is probably someone that I would consider potentially in a cash context. He shouldn't see Ramsey both based on alignment, and Ramsey is not really shadowing all that much. If he does shadow, probably going to be more likely that he'll shadow Mike Williams. And in his last 3 games, Keenan Allen has 14, 14, 9, a down game, and 14 targets. So he's absolutely stepped back into that volume monster role that we drafted him or know him to fill in this Chargers offense. I think we'll see more of the same for him. Don't recall if I said DK Metcalf, but he is a strike through for me against this tough Jet secondary. Same thing with Lockett if he plays. Kind of like Mike Evans a little bit here. I already made the case for just how much of a feature the passing game is for the 2022 Bucks still. Mike Evans is the biggest beneficiary of JC Horn being ruled out. He turned in a top 10 performance the last time that they played against these Carolina Panthers. So I think he's really in a solid spot to push for even kind of top 5 upside. Also, his primary matchup against CJ Henderson, he's got like 4 inches and 45 pounds on him. Like he can just absolutely bully him. So he's someone to consider. Jerry Jeudy's an interesting dart in the DFS context as well. Boom or bust, but that's the nature of the tournament game. And that's by and large my pool. I might talk myself into a little bit more Pittman as we get closer to lock, but as we sit today, not someone that I'm making a priority.
No, unfortunately, as the Giant fan, Adoree Jackson is doubtful again for this, which really would have hurt Pittman. But yeah, he did get 7 targets last game from Foles, so he kind of remains the top target in the Indianapolis offense. But I'm probably not going there either. Under the 6K, there are some interesting plays, several of them, in fact. But I will first touch on the guy that we mentioned way back at the beginning of this show, and that's Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson is a cash lock at 5,500. Just Mike White is back as quarterback, which is pretty much all you need to know about him. He has averaged 19.6 fantasy points per game with White as the quarterback, as opposed to 9.2 with Zach Wilson as the quarterback. So 5,500 against Seattle is far, far, far too cheap for Garrett Wilson. So you don't have to overthink that when you put him in your cash lineup. What about GPP for you on Wilson? I'm curious on your take because the rostership is going to follow what I just said.
Yeah, it's going to boil down to that. Where he sits right now, I think you can stomach it. Specifically, if you're needing some salary relief. I mean, he shouldn't be 5.5K in this matchup and with Mike White under center. So, he's not exactly a free square, but you're going to get incredible points per dollar. I don't mind eating that if he doesn't get too popular. But ultimately, I mean, he's just a different player with Mike White under center. So he'll still be in the pool. I'm not super excited about trying to stack this game or find correlation therein. So that's the kind of basis of the hesitation you hear in my response. But if you want a one-off flyer as the last guy in, he's certainly a well-qualified candidate.
Yeah, and just as a roster construction point, if he's kind of the one you fit in, it probably means you stacked. Any stack is going to get leverage on something if you build it right. So, I mean, you can just put Wilson in, eat the chalk there, and that'll be just fine. Another one that I really like in this range, and it's weird to say because I poo-pooed the Rodgers play so much earlier in the quarterback, but Allen Lazard at 50. Lazard at 5,400 is really kind of standing out to me this week. 11 targets last week. Christian Watson is questionable. Minnesota is now giving up the most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. Even if Watson plays, I think this is a good value at 5,400. So he's someone I'm definitely going to be considering in cash as well. You seem to be into this as well. So what do you think on Lazard?
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and my excitement is largely based in having to steer people away from Romeo Doubs this week. At least kind of the narrative that Doubs is the one who steps up with Christian Watson out. It looks like Christian Watson is very, very questionable this week. So I'll start
Mhm.
with that. And when Christian Watson exited last week, you mentioned that it was immediately Alan Lazard's season. He set a season high for routes run at 38. He tied season highs with 11 targets and 3 red zone targets. This matchup against Minnesota is absolutely fantastic. So Lazard is certainly the Packers wide receiver that I am most excited about, especially at his rostership mid single digits. You can certainly work with that all day and all night. So glad that we are in lockstep there. I just finished writing up Alan Lazard.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love to hear that. Um, so let's kind of talk. We have 10 minutes left, and we want to get to the tight end position as well. But let's kind of talk about other receivers in this cheap range. I'll throw out some names that are in my cash pool. You can put your GPP spin on it if any of them are standouts to you, and anyone else that I missed. So we got Curtis Samuel at 4,400. He was a lot better when Carson Wentz was the quarterback, which he is this week. I think that's fine to do. Brandon Cooks at 4,800 in that game against Jacksonville. I was always been a big Brandon Cooks fan in DFS. That kind of fell off when he started chirping that he wanted out of there. But I'm okay using him. And then on the cheaper side, Garrett Wilson's teammate, Elijah Moore, he's a lot more relevant with Mike White as quarterback as well. And then I don't know what to expect from Arizona's passing game, but Greg Dortch is the minimum 3,000. I think those are all cash viable plays you can do. Any of those you like better than others, and anyone I missed?
Yeah, I mean that's really the majority of the list for me. Curtis Samuel's a different player with Wentz under center. The Dortch play is super interesting to me, right? It's gonna be an ugly game, but for him to pay off mid salary is certainly something that he is capable of doing, coming off of an 11 target game last week, right? Caught 10 of them for 98 yards. You can make a argument whether or not Blau is an upgrade from McSorley. He's likely a push, so he can certainly get there. He offers you a ton of flexibility in by way of salary relief. I think the only name running through the list that you just shared that we didn't touch on, DJ Chark, 4.3K. I'm going to be looking for a number of ways to get into this game, and that includes DJ Chark. So he's really the only name that I would look to add to your list. Apart from that, it was rock solid.
What about Tutu Atwell at 3,600? I find myself wanting to go back to him, and maybe more so in showdowns. I had a lot of him in that game that they just played when they had one of the primetime games. I don't even remember who it was against. Was that the Chargers last week that they did that?
Last week it was Denver.
Denver last week. Okay, they played a night game recently, and I had him all over the place in showdown. Are you into him at all? He's on the field all the time. He's just not doing much with it.
Yeah, not really. That might have been the Las Vegas game, the Baker Mayfield game that you're thinking of. He was getting those little 6-yard curls all night long. He had 9 targets, 5 for 50 in that game.
Okay, yeah.
His role in this offense, largely remains unchanged. He's out there all the time, like you mentioned. But it seems like his involvement has been going the wrong direction. Went from 9 targets down to 4, down to 2, while the Rams are losing pass catchers left and right. I think what we're really seeing with Tutu is he is the counterbalance to the emergence of Tyler Higbee over these last couple of weeks, right? He was used in that kind of tight end part of the field in that one bigger game, Baker's first game against Las Vegas. And since then, it seems like Baker's gotten into a bit more of a rhythm with Higbee. He's running more routes, and I think that's chipping away at Atwell's role.
I gotcha. Yeah. On paper, he seems like he's better, but I mean, there's really nothing to show for what we're seeing on paper. And I think you kind of hit on why that is. All right, so that's the wide receiver position. We got a little less than 10 minutes. I want to get to the tight end position quick. For me, there's 3 players that I want to talk about, and then you can kind of put the bow on They're these mid-tier GPP plays. One's expensive, one's middle, one's cheap. So starting at the top, plain and simple, I'll ask, is Travis Kelce worth 8,100? I think he always is in DFS play. I don't think you need to go there in cash this week, especially against Denver, which is a pretty tough matchup against the passing game. But what's your Kelce temperature check this week?
Always worth it every single week. Probably not going to answer that question any other way. I don't know if he gets you a lot of leverage to pay off his salary. It's a lot of money. Maybe if you catch a wild hair and you want to, try to stack the KC side, it adds some intrigue to Kelce. But if nothing else, he's super safe, even all the way up at 8.1K.
Yeah, that's where I would tend to think as well. All right, so now the middle one, this is kind of along the same lines as the ETN play. Evan Engram. I hate having to praise this guy after what he was in the Giantville, but he's 40 targets over the last 4 weeks, and not only that, but some monster games mixed in there too. He's 4,400. He's got 100. He went for 7,113 last week, 8 for 62 the week before, 11 for 162, and 2 touchdowns the week before that. 4,400 seems awfully cheap for putting up lines like that. I guess for me, the only thing holding him back potentially is what I talked about with ETN. If Jacksonville pulls the plug on their starters, but he's looking like the chalk tight end. What's your take on him?
Yeah, he will be the chalk tight end. I don't see anybody even within striking distance of him, and with good reason. He's tight end 5 on the season now. It is a special type of hell for Giants fans to have to sit through this. So I apologize that I have to heap praise on him as well. But yeah, you mentioned this recent tear, right? 10 targets, almost 8 receptions, almost 92 yards per game over his last 4. He's got 3 touchdowns, I should say, in that stretch. And this Jags emergence of late has really heavily relied on the passing game, right? So, decent enough spot against Houston. It's a favorable matchup against tight ends. It's not as favorable as they are at some of the other positions, but he should certainly be able to take full advantage of the run that he gets. And like we established earlier, I think Jacksonville, by and large, plays a pretty typical game this week. So, gotta love Engram at 4.4K.
All right, so yeah, there's the Engram. It would feel a lot worse if we were bad. It helps that like the Giants are in playoff contention here and can get in here. If Engram left and they're looking to get in and we're 4-12, right? That would really, really kill me. But it's okay. I'm happy for the guy, I guess. And then the cheap guy that I'm looking at is, speaking of the Giants, Jelani Woods. He had 5 targets last week. He's 2,800. That's the kind of price tight end that I'm always looking for in cash. I don't trust the Colts offense per se, but 5 targets for 2,800. That's all I'm looking for there. Kylan Granson's out. The Giants do struggle to cover the middle of the field. Their linebacker play has not been good, so I think he can pay off that price tag. What's your thought on him?
Yeah, I thought I was going to be the sneaky / spicy one that was heaping praise onto Jelani Woods, but he's certainly the punt priority here, specifically with Kylan Granson out, right? So I mean, he has to do so little to pay off that price tag. Generally speaking, we've seen the Colts really favor the tight end as a priority in their passing game this year. So those are more looks for Woods, and he'll probably be he'll be inside the top 5 in terms of rostership at the position when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. All right, so since I took away your spice for him, how about some other ones? Those are kind of my 3 here. Talk me into deviating the pool a little bit for GPPs.
I mean, those are certainly the right 3. There's probably not enough being said about TJ Hawkinson and his role in this Minnesota Vikings offense in general, right? My favorite joke in the offseason was that we've been waiting for the third-year breakout for Hawkinson for like 6 years now. And it just turns out that he needed to get out of Detroit. And he's now tight end 2. He's coming off of a 16 target, 13 catch, 2 touchdown, 109-yard performance last week.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I don't think he goes to those heights necessarily this week, but he's going to be in a game that has some shootout potential. He's not going to be rostered nearly as much as he should. So there's an argument to be made for him, specifically if you're trying to get into that Minnesota Green Bay game. From there, David Njoku is a little bit interesting. Certainly seems like he's gotten into a pretty good rapport with Deshaun Watson pretty quickly. Watson has always been a supporter of tight end production back to his time in Houston, so he's someone to consider. That's really where I'm looking for my tight end exposure. I usually have a pretty tight pool. Tyler Higbee, he's running more routes. He's obviously coming off of a pretty big performance. If he stays relatively under rostered, make a case there as well if you're looking for like a run back in your Chargers builds.
All right. I love it. So that is the tight end position. And that is going to probably about do it for us. I mean, we can spend a minute on the defenses here if we want. Defenses are a bit of a crapshoot, but 49ers are looking like major chalk for cash at 2,900. I would just go there. Any GPP standout plays that you like on team defense?
Yeah, I mean, this is chalk that you eat with San Francisco, especially at that price tag. If you are on the side of the paradigm with Jacksonville that they don't play a typical game, Houston's defense has been playing better of late, certainly. Their secondary is surprisingly in a position where they could probably take advantage of a backup quarterback. Starting defenses against backup quarterbacks is always something to consider. So if you want to, really throw a dart, and if you believe that Jacksonville doesn't play a normal game, beyond that, it's really going to come down to where I have correlation with running backs more than anything.
Yeah, that's usually the way I go to. I'll throw out the Falcons. I think the Falcons defense against Arizona, and we bashed poor David Blau this entire show, so we might as well throw the Atlanta defense on him too. All right, that's going to do it for us for this week. Thank you for all who tuned in and brought your questions. Good luck, not only in DFS, but in your championship weeks. We will be back to discuss Week 18, which should be a whole mess of fun with teams resting players if things shake out certain ways. So you'll want to tune in. We'll be all over the replacement plays and playoff scenarios and everything. So we are going to sign off for now. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. I am at JAC3600. Eric is at FantasyNav, FantasyNav, and good luck.